What's some of the new exciting stuff in your world?
I have moved to Hong Kong and I'm happy to be the CEO of a company called Pirata Group. We have a number of different restaurants, Spanish, Italian, Indian, Japanese, across Hong Kong.
It's great to hear. So it sounds like there's so many different, like you said, genres in terms of cuisine. How do you, as someone who's looking after the brand, make sure you're appealing to each of the different cuisines while appealing to the overall brand?
So basically, you know me, I'm a brand person, and I also believe that all brands need to come with an experience. So the fortunate thing about working with brands in our business in restaurants is that people actually will enter your brand and spend 15 minutes, an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. It might be for a birthday, it might be for a date, and so on. So to me, having this as an opportunity to build brand experiences is fantastic. Each of our 16 brands have a well-defined brand DNA in terms of what it sets out to do. It's always very driven by hospitality. Our company's motto is we provide unconditional hospitality, but we also respect the individuality of each individual brand, each individual restaurant concept. So we start by saying what are the best ways for us to look after our guests, and we do so in a way that respects each brand's individuality. Give you an example. We have a wonderful brand called Tokyo Lima. Tokyo Lima is a Nikkei cuisine, so Japanese Peruvian concept that serves up Japanese inspired food utilizing South American ingredients. But it's more than just a meal, it's a whole experience in a restaurant where music, lighting, service, everything comes together into an overall experience. So we try to add as many layers on the experience as we can and make sure that we respect each individual concept's unique DNA.
Yeah, that's one thing you've always done very well is building brand exceptional customer experiences. Now, customer experience is one of those keywords that comes up time and time again, particularly in the tech world. I'm curious, when you're building these brand DNAs and things like that, how do you make sure that you're building an exceptional customer experience from the get-go?
It's really simple. It starts by hiring the right people. And rather than say people, we say we build teams. So across all our venues, there are three things that they all have in common: strong teams, strong culinary authenticity, and value for money. We believe that to serve a good meal, you need to have people working in a restaurant that enjoy working, they enjoy working together. So for us, making sure that we are careful in the screening, careful in the training, and that we reward people for looking well after our guests is, I think, the key thing for us. The restaurant business is a very low-tech business, apart from all the people that traditionally work in the business, because humans are humans after all. So I would say building strong teams and making sure that they understand how to serve our guests depending on the individual concept will be the number one starting point for us.
Absolutely. I think once again, it's something you've done very well. I'm curious, going back to how do you pick the right people? Because like you said, they're ultimately responsible for the customer experience. How do you make sure you have the right people on the team?
So we are agnostic with regard to age, gender, race, religion. We really don't care. We care a lot about what we call the Pirata culture, which is that we do give a damn about things. We can have tough conversations, we can be demanding with each other and ourselves, but at the end of the day, we work together as a team. We realize that as a team, you can achieve more than what you could be doing individually, and that we share more than just the same employer. So I think having a careful screening process, first of all. Second is that right from the first day that someone joins a company, the induction is important. Even to this day, I go myself every Monday morning when we have induction classes. I take about 20 minutes to talk to the new inductees about my background, about the values of the company, and about how I also expect and will support our people in working together as a team. So this is where we spend a lot of time on building that from the get-go. We also quite keen to reward the people that go out and deliver what our guests tell us that they enjoyed. And also for people who need a bit of help, a bit of coaching, a bit of mentoring, we do that too. But in the end, if it doesn't work out, we also are not shying away from saying to someone, we think you probably may be happier working someplace else. So it's about being very deliberate and very intentional in the way you bring people on board. And right from the first day, tell them what are the key values of our company and show them that together we can achieve much more as a team.
Yeah, I think it's quite rare when someone in a senior position is involved in the onboarding. I think out of all the onboardings I've been in, it's usually some recording of the CEO. It's never the person physically there. And I think it shows the people how serious the leadership team is,
Yeah,
because if they're serious, then obviously as an employee, I'm going to be following that a
yeah,
passion. So I
yeah.
think it makes perfect sense.
But I do it for two specific reasons, right? So I'll show up, I wear a nice shirt, and I look like a CEO. But what
Yeah.
I want to tell the people is, if I ask you today, what is your biggest ambition? And you say, Steen, I want your job. I will say, good for you, because I want them all to feel that the sky's the limit for them in our company. And anyone who's willing to put in the effort and work hard, there's no limit to it. And secondly, my background was quite simple. When I grew up, we didn't go to restaurants maybe once a year. We could afford to go to a restaurant. We had food on the table, but going to restaurants was a bit of a luxury. So there was always something very special for me about when we go to a restaurant once a year. Later on, as I tell my teams in my induction classes, later on, as I began to make a bit of money on my newspaper route, and I would take someone out on a date, there was a sense of excitement. So to me, these two things, some things feel special, and a sense of excitement is something that I really want our restaurants to provide to all our guests. Hopefully, in these sessions, the time I take to meet up with, it could be between 5 and 20 people in each class. I fire them up about the fact that the sky is the limit if you're willing to work hard and take chances in your career. And secondly, there's nothing secret about me other than I kept working hard in my whole life, and I stayed curious. So that's the values we're trying to inculcate in the new team members.
Now, I'm sure they feel inspired. I feel inspired every time we catch up, so I'm sure they feel the same way. I'm curious, going back to what you mentioned earlier, if I have this correctly, untraditional hospitality, because Asia is obviously well known for some amazing restaurants and culinary experiences, whether it's the franchises or the mom and pop shops. So, how do you build something that differentiates from such a competitive scene?
So I have always, as you may remember from my Four Fingers days, I always believed in reversing the loyalty paradigm of building loyalty from your consumers to your brand. I believe much more in a brand building loyalty to its guests. Okay. And we do this along three axes. First of all, we bring aboard just amazing people. Secondly, we provide authentic foods. If our guests turn out not to like a particular dish, we don't change the recipe. We replace that dish with some other dish that is also authentic, and so on. And then lastly, we make sure that we're providing great value for money. One of our founders, like me, comes from a quite simple background. He shared with me that he always knew from when he was quite young that he wanted to work with restaurants. He would say, go to nice restaurants, be able to afford the cheapest dish on the menu, and then sit there and make lots of photos and take lots of notes. And he always felt that the people in the restaurants were looking down on him. This is some guy who can't really afford to be here. And he swore when one day he has his own restaurant, everyone is welcome. So across the board to this day, everyone is welcome in our restaurants, and we are always trying to provide them with this unconditional hospitality, great food, great music. If people have special requests, it's not we'll see, it is what is it, we'll see where we can make it happen. We have a lot of birthday parties in our restaurants because many people choose us for their special day. So it's not so much one thing we do, but it's one value that we try to live by in everything that we do.
Yeah, I love those personal stories. I think that's one thing that you've done very well doing previously in our interviews. And it sounds like the other gentleman has done as well, too. And like you said, it makes it more personal because, like I said, if you have someone who's didn't have the money to save up, now he's founded the company, he's running the company, it hits a little bit different as the employee as well, too. So I love that story. And,
Yep.
Going back to what you were saying earlier, I use your case studies all the time in my MBA classes now as best practices and building experience. And one thing you talked about, we talked about in your previous role, and you mentioned just now, is the music. And I know it seems like a very subtle thing. You have a very interesting way of incorporating music into the ambiance and the entire feeling. So how do you go
Yep.
about doing that?
Interestingly, that also happens to be of our two founders. One of them, as his pet peeve, has lighting, and the other has music. So to this day, one of our two founders, Manuel, he still makes the playlist for our restaurants. So I think that in putting together an experience, music, our hearing is a critically important part of our sensory perceptions. And way too often, music is something that you will pipe from the radio and you play it on the loudspeakers that is provided as part of the PA evacuation system. loudspeakers not made for music, but for basically saying evacuate the building. I believe in making sure that we are very deliberate in the choices of music that we play by brand, by day part, and by time of the week, how loud, and especially on what sound system we are playing in. I can think of nothing nicer than a nice, deep, dry bass to set the energy of a restaurant. And I think any restaurant needs to have that pulse or that heartbeat. And the music is that what provides that together with the people who work there. I don't get involved in music taste. I think we'll be probably a little bit too old for some of our guests, but I make sure that we spend a lot of attention to it and make sure that sound systems and playlists and volumes are always predetermined so that it's consistent for all our brands.
Interesting, even volumes down to that level of minute detail, which I think
Yeah,
is really
so
important.
music and lighting is literally programmed throughout the day. So the dimmer switch and the volume button is set to make certain changes throughout the day to match the mood of the restaurant, to match the day part, and so on. So all with a lot of deliberation.
That sounds quite high tech. That's what I was going to ask you as well too, because you talked about F&B tends to be more of a low tech, more people centric approach. AI is going crazy on social media and things like that. Do you see more high tech and more AI being involved and injected into the F&B space?
I think that there are two aspects of this. There is what customers will see and have access to, and there is what you use as an operator. So I think as an operator, there's no doubt that technology can help do certain things more effectively, more efficiently, and the cost of labor will tend to go up. The cost of technology will tend to go down. So I think as an operator, you need to ask this question. But I think as a brand, you need to be very clear about where your consumers are expecting technology to be available to them and where it should not be. I've always liked sort of technology, but with a human touch, where you can redeploy your team members from the menial tasks of taking orders to spending time with guests and chatting with them and making sure that they are okay. By brand, I think it's quite different. And I think also by what part of the world that you are in. I spent 1.5 years in Scandinavia before I came to Hong Kong. And there, the expectation is you walk into a restaurant, where's the QR code? Okay, let's order, let's pay, and we're all set. We can enjoy the evening. I don't think Hong Kong is ready for that yet, because I think people still here believe in service and human interaction. But I think any brand needs to be very clear with regard to where technology plays a role in the brand experience. So clearly now go to McDonald's, people are now expecting the kiosks, but I would never put kiosks in these restaurants. It wouldn't fit. It's out of place. Right? So I think by brand and by customer profile, it's important to know, is there a role for technology? And if there is, where does it stop and where does it start?
I think it does make sense in terms of culturally as well too. If I go back to, we used to live in China, and I remember those massive menus or like 100 pages of all the different dishes, and there was something special about that it's very difficult to recreate if I'm just trying to do it on my mobile phone. Maybe
Yeah.
once again I'm an old person, but I always enjoyed those big physical, like it felt like a dictionary, but it
Yeah.
really got you excited in terms of the selection.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree.
Anything else in terms of what's working or what's not working that you've seen? Maybe look at it from a cultural perspective, like you said, because obviously you've come from Europe, now you're doing it in Asia, and you're doing it across probably multiple Asian markets. What are some of the cultural nuances that you think folks need to be aware of?
I think, first of all, one thing that I want to share is that Pirata didn't only survive and stay alive during COVID, we actually more than doubled our restaurant count and our market share. And I think the only other companies that have done this is whether you're producing gloves or COVID tests, you will have a busy time. But we managed to double our market share during COVID. And we did this by completely reinventing marketing. So rather than coming from a position of weakness and saying, we need to slash our prices to get people through the doors, we developed new day parts and new usage occasions that were driven by the restrictions. So for instance, when there were dining restrictions, you must close by 6 o'clock. We came up with, we call them dunch and frunch. So different day parts where we said to guests, it's all very confusing, but why don't you come down from 4 to 6 and we'll serve up a nice meal before you go home because restaurants have to close. We rallied our suppliers around doing things like free flow, not free flow, but free flow. So we kept reinventing the playbook to come from a position of strength during this difficult time when people were holed up at home and people saying, what is actually going on here? And I believe that marketers, and I was a keynote speaker recently at a conference here in Hong Kong, marketers need to all the time be willing to reinvent the playbook because consumers are increasingly getting desensitized to the old ways of doing things.
And one thing you talked about coming up with traditional, or sorry, breaking away from the traditional playbooks. And one thing that's always stuck with me that I always share with my MBA students, you remember the wall analogy that you shared with me, looking for the cracks in the wall?
Yeah.
Maybe you could reshare it. I'm going to butcher it, but you shared that idea with it. It's always stuck with me to this
Yeah.
day.
I think I shared many things with you. This was about blind spots, right?
Yes.
I think it was about every day approaching the venue with a fresh pair of eyes rather than eventually begin to look for or stop seeing the things that are there every day. I think it's human. We all do it. I do it at home. Right? And it really bothers me when it happens. The way we do it in Pirata is very simple. There's a great technology solution that prevents this from happening by every day making sure that our leaders not just walk around, but actually have to take photos of things, upload to the app, so we always have visibility on what's happening out in the restaurant. I think blind spots is one thing when it has to do with the physical condition, that crack in the wall, for instance, but a blind spot can also be in the head where you just stop worrying about certain things, right? So for me, we're trying to use technology as a way to not allow blind spots to happen and make sure that all the routines that are important, especially for our guests, for their well-being, for their experience, for their safety, and so on, we're relying on technology rather than individuals only. Technology can do two things really well: follow orders and remember stuff. And these are the two things that humans invariably tend to be not always very good at.
I love that as well too, because you're almost crowdsourcing like the blind spots from other people. Presumably you're having it people from different restaurants and different outlets, and so you're having them come together and saying, okay, here's a blind spot, or here's something maybe overlooking. Is it something that you're missing in your restaurant? So I think it's a brilliant analogy.
Yeah, yeah.
Awesome. Steen, thank you so much. Like I said, I always love catching up with you, and I really appreciate you taking the time with us to share your
Excellent.
insights and frameworks.
Good talking to you again.